Do I look like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson? Be honest, do I look like The Rock? Because Loki, this fit, I'm like... Do I? I guess just comment down below who you think wore it best. Hey, what's up you guys? My name is Kylie. If this is your first time here, welcome to the madness. I'm kidding. But seriously, if you are new here, I've been making these comparison videos lately. I've also been doing a Decades of Horror series where I do my top 10 from each decade, starting with the 50s. I also just cover basically anything horror related, so I hope you stick around. Click the subscribe, the notification bell, so you don't miss my next video. But I'm super excited for today's comparison because we have 13 ghosts from 1960 and we have 13 ghosts from 2001. I'm particularly excited for this one because I love early 2000s horror. It is so ridiculous, and 13 ghosts is so absurd. It is no exception to the mess that came from the early 2000s. So naturally, comparing it to a movie from 1960, we have a lot to talk about today. First, I'll give you some background info on the movies, box office numbers, historical significance, fun facts, things like that. Then I'll go over a very brief synopsis of each movie, and I'll kind of compare the plots a little bit. From there, we will compare and contrast the special effects in each movie, talking about both practical, CGI, everything like that, comparing them, where we've improved and maybe where we've gotten worse in terms of effects. And then finally we get into the meat of the movies. We talk about the various themes that are presented and we try to decide like what were these movies trying to say. And then at the very end we will do a general comparison and I will try to decide which movie I enjoy more. That's the general structure for all these comparison videos, so I hope that you enjoy, but let's just get started. Okay, so we will be starting off with 13 Ghosts from 1960. This is directed by William Castle, who I let you guys know in my last video on the 60s that he's become one of my favorite directors from that decade. He also directed House on Haunted Hill, which is actually from 1958. He directed The Tingler, which I think is 1959. And he also directed two of my other favorites from the 60s, and that would be Homicidal and Straight Jacket, both very, very fun movies. This movie made roughly $1.5 million in the box office, which is pretty good for 1960. This movie does revolve around a large mansion, and the exterior was actually shot at the Winchester Mystery House, which is located in California, specifically in San Jose, which is not too far from me, either from LA or from my home in Northern California. I really, really want to visit it. So Winchester Mystery House, if you want to hook a girl up, I'll do some promo, you know, we can talk later. Anyway, more fun facts. The lion ghost in this movie is actually the same lion that played Kitty Cat in Addams Family. That was the television series that was running at around the same time. In this movie, several people call Elaine Zacharides a witch, and she is actually played by Margaret Hamilton, who played the Wicked Witch in The Wizard of Oz in 1939.
The Wicked Witch of the East, bro!
I personally speculate that movies like this were made due to the success of House on Haunted Hill. You also had The Haunting and you had The Innocents that also came out in the 60s, among, I'm sure, many other ghost stories. I mean, you also had stories like Taste of Fear that were somewhat ghostly, and you also had a lot of movies that took place in big mansions concerning wealthy families' estates and all the betrayal and such that would happen amongst families. A lot of family dramas, a lot of family hauntings in the 60s. So the original 13 Ghosts is definitely a product of its time. Moving on now to the background of 13 Ghosts from 2001. This was directed by Steve Beck, and he only went on to direct one more movie to this date, and it would be Ghost Ship from 2002. This movie made $68.5 million in the box office, also pretty good for 2001. Famous film critic Roger Ebert had several praises of this movie, actually. He loved the production value. He said, "The production is first rate, the physical look of the picture is splendid." However, he also then criticized the story. He claimed that there was bad editing, there was a lack of interesting characters, and in fact, in 2005, he put this movie on his most hated films list. This movie was also made on a $42 million budget, and so the box office technically was a success, but then once they factored in all the costs of advertising and such, it was actually a very critical failure for the studio. This was only the second production ever of Dark Castle Entertainment. It's really sad because this discouraged the studio from remaking more William Castle films, even though they did the next year with Ghost Ship, but then that was also a financial critical failure. Warner Bros. And Dark Castle also originally wanted to release this movie in 3D, much like the original was. They wanted to carry over the gimmick and pay homage to the original, but these plans were scrapped. I don't really know why, because in the original you needed these special glasses to be able to see the ghost ghosts, and that detail was actually kept in the remake, but they just didn't make it a 3D viewing experience for the audience. And for my last fun fact, this was the first film from a major American studio to feature 3 Arab American leads. So I guess this movie can be accredited with a small feat in representation. Okay, now I'm gonna get into the plot synopsis breakdown of each movie so we're all caught up, we know what happens in each movie. I'm gonna be giving you more of a vague overview of what happens because I don't think it's important that you know exactly what happens in each movie. I'm also hoping that you've seen these movies, or at least the remake. This is one of those cases where I feel like you can get away with just having seen the remake watching my video. Or not, you know, maybe you're just here to learn. That's cool too. Welcome. So to kick it off with the synopsis of the original movie, when occultist uncle Dr. Plato Zorba bequeaths a large house to his nephew Cyrus and his impoverished family, they are shocked to find the house is haunted by 12 ghosts, all held captive in the eerie house looking for an unlucky 13th ghost to free them. And then the remake is about a family that inherits a spectacular old house from an eccentric uncle. There's just one problem: the house seems to have a dangerous agenda all its own. Trapped in their home by strangely shifting walls, the family encounters powerful and vengeful entities that threaten to annihilate anyone in their path. So we do actually have some major plot differences that I do want to touch on. In the original, the motivation is mainly money for the antagonist, who is a human. He's just attempting to swindle this family of a secret stashed fortune. The ghosts are more of a spectacle, honestly, in the original and more of a secondary issue, whereas in the remake, I would consider a lot of the ghosts to actually be the antagonist because they are the major obstacle throughout most of the movie. And then we get a delicious twist near the end once we learn that Uncle Cyrus is actually still alive and he is definitely the main antagonist. But this man already had all the money that he would ever need. He was a billionaire, and so his main motivation was power. He was willing to sacrifice his family members to open what was essentially a vessel to see the past, present, and future, if I understood that correctly. The remake is just a lot more dramatic. There are a lot more subplots going on. I think there's just a lot more that demands your attention. That'll do it for the plot for right now. We're gonna get into the next portion of the video, which is talking about the characters. So in the original 13 Ghosts, the character that I mentioned earlier, Elaine, she was the dead uncle's psychic assistant who lived in the house. And then in the remake, they decided to split her character up into 3 different people, actually. You had Dennis the psychic, you had Kalina the assistant, and Maggie the housekeeper. Backpedaling a little bit, because I'll talk about the remake in a second. With the original, I just feel like there weren't really any characters that stood out to me that much besides Elaine. I think I accidentally called her Hilda in my last video. I don't know why I thought her name was Hilda, but here we are. We live and we learn, and life goes on. The family in the original was just very basic. They didn't have any zany characters, I would say. I don't even remember the names, and honestly, I don't care to. I don't think it's that important. One thing I noted, though, was that the father and the son in this movie seemed incredibly dumb. Like, they would go down to look at the ghosts, and then when they saw them, they would just kind of stand there and watch them and hardly react, and it's kind of like, aren't you a little bit frightened, perhaps? So not a whole lot of interest there. We're gonna jump ahead to the remake now. And the characters in the remake, oh boy, there are aplenty. I have to talk about Matthew Lillard first, for obvious reasons. He played Dennis Rafkin, basically a dude that was hired by the rich uncle to capture ghosts for him. Basically like a ghost whisperer, if you will. And you already know he brings his weird ass energy to set. You already know. He has this distinct charm that he plays with literally any character, and it's hard to explain why, but he's just always undeniably the weirdest guy there. His character is very eccentric. I think it was a really good idea for them to split the original Elaine into 3 separate characters, because then it allowed young Matthew to really lean into this ghost fighter catcher role. He sold me. The movie is ridiculous, but he sold me. That's what I love about Matthew Lillard so much. If you're new here, I do have just like a slight obsession with him. It's okay, it's totally normal. But he just never feels too cool for anything. He will just give any role everything that he's got. They did me so dirty though. I thought he was gonna make it alive out of this one. Just give me a horror movie where Matthew Lillard lives for once, please. That's a tangent though. Let's reel it back. Let's get back to the characters. Up next we have the dad. He's a very typical bumbling kind of dad, and it's also kind of the stereotypical like, oh, his wife just died, so he was kind of going through that character development. The teenage daughter in this movie is actually from Scary Movie. That's where you would probably recognize her from. I like liked her character in this movie. She could be a little bit full of herself, whatever, but like she's a teenage girl. I don't know. I identified with her. Then there's also a kid. He is unimportant. Up next, we have the babysitter, and I loved her. She was written and played up to be a little bit stereotypical, but I thought she was still a great character, and she made it alive out of this movie, thank God. And that being said, I still feel like she was written with a degree of accuracy. You know how there's rightfully that running joke that white people are always doing the dumbest stuff in horror movies that black people never would? So she kind of plays that voice of reason in this movie, and she's someone that as an audience member you can really latch onto because you relate to her the most. So it also just makes her a really great person to root for. I'll say it again, I'm so glad she made it out of this movie because at one point you think that she won't. As for the villains of both the original and remake, I don't feel like there's really too much to compare there. Basically just one is motivated by money and one is motivated by power. Nothing else really stood out too much to me, at least nothing that was worth talking about. So now we can move on to the effects, which this will be a really fun portion of the video because we have a lot to get into. In the original, we had a lot of weird stuff going on with the effects. With several of his more famous movies, William Castle would often use some sort of gimmick to try to promote his movies. So for this movie, it was the weird little 3D glasses that the audience members would wear. In the theaters, most of the scenes were black and white, but then the scenes that were involving the ghosts were shown in a process dubbed Illusion O. The filmed elements of like the actors and the sets had a blue filter applied to the footage, while the ghost elements had a red filter, and those were superimposed over the frame. And audiences received the viewers with the blue and red cellophane filters on them. TV and home releases were then edited to simulate the effect without needing the glasses. So that's how you and I would watch it, at least that's how I watched it, and it doesn't look great. So the effects of this movie don't really hold up. The gimmick can be a little bit distracting, it might take you out of the movie sometimes. I personally still thought it was really enjoyable just because I think it's really funny. Even if the effects are pretty bad and there is a ghost lion for some reason, I mean, it's peak entertainment value. In the remake, we had a wild mixture of both practical effects and CGI, so let's just get into it. The effect for the torso ghost was achieved using a double amputee wearing a special black hood, and that could be used to digitally remove his head. Also, of all of the creature makeup that was applied in this film, which was a lot because all of the ghosts were practical, the angry princess actually took the longest to apply because that took a grand total of 5 hours. This is also Shauna Lawyer's only film, and she has attained a very small cult following just from her role as the angry princess. John DeSantis is a close second though because he played the Juggernaut, and his makeup took almost 5 hours to apply and 3 hours to take off. So that's just a little taste of all of the practical effects they used to bring all of these ghosts to life. As part of my effects portion, sometimes I also like to talk about the production design of each movie. So as for the remake, the production design and the house that they built for these sets, are you joking? It is so cool. Like all the mechanics of the house that were done practically, I'm obsessed. It's like a Disney movie on steroids. And honestly, when it comes to the original, there's just not really much to compare with the production design. The remake knocked the original completely out of the park, so I'm just gonna continue on with the rest of the effects. The last thing under the topic of effects would be the CGI that was used in this movie. It's a doozy. CGI was obviously not a perfected craft in 2000, so for their big machine set piece, that was all CGI, and it didn't look great. I forgot to mention though that the computer generated imagery of the outside of the house actually looks really good, and I wasn't aware that it was CGI, but also that's quite obvious to me now because, like, of course it is. Again, though, this is just a personal thing, but I think that's one of the most charming things about the early 2000s. They were like, yeah, CGI has totally been perfected. It's gonna look great. And then it looks like that. There's honestly a lot more that could be said. I just kind of want to cover everything generally. Otherwise, I'd be going on about the effects for way too long. Like, it would become its own video, you know? So we're gonna move on now to the thematics of each movie before we do our final comparison. And I'm gonna keep it real. I don't think there is much of a way to dig deep with either of these movies. The original was even sold with a gimmick. I think the intention was more for success rather than telling some kind of profound story about the afterlife. And same with the remake, except that I'll say there were some more family values that they tried to put forward. They also tried to give some of the characters development, like I mentioned the father. He was sort of learning how to be a single dad, and in the end, the family was brought closer together. The teenage girl also learned to appreciate her family more. All basic classic Disney shit, really. I know I keep referring to Disney, it's obviously not a Disney film, but tell me that when you watch this, you don't pick up on Disney vibes, okay? Other than that, I guess I would say in the original, maybe greed makes people do crazy things. This guy was breaking into this family's home and trying to find secret money. In the remake, it's really just, you know, rich people be rich peopling. But we all know this already, like billionaires are not good people.
Ooh, wow, so profound.
Yeah, I know. So now for an overall comparison, it's time to decide which is the superior movie. Plot-wise, I do think the remake is a lot richer. There are more characters, therefore more character motivations to uncover. Arguably maybe one too many characters in the remake, but still I think just all the different subplots make it a lot more interesting, a lot more captivating. Also in terms of the remake and the characters, you already know I like them better. I mean, Matthew Lillard can carry that burden all on his own. But also we have the babysitter, and I do like the family dynamic a bit more in the remake, I think. And with the effects, you know, I feel like this one's also a bit of an easy answer. I think the original is very charming and very entertaining with what it tries to do with the ghosts, but just the sheer volume of the different kinds of effects we got to see in the remake, I think makes it superior, especially because of all the practical effects of the ghosts. A lot of them look incredible. There was just a lot more artistry, I felt, that went into the remake. And then as for thematics, I think the movies are more or less on even ground. Both movies are really just meant for fun, so thematically, I couldn't really choose. So overall, I gotta say that this one is kind of a sweep. The remake takes it. I think the remake is the superior film. Don't get me wrong though, I really enjoyed the original William Castle movie. Like I said, he's one of my favorite directors of the 60s, but I just have such a soft spot for the early 2000s. I love Matthew Lillard, and there's just a lot about the remake that is so enchanting. I mean, the production design alone could carry the movie. Matthew Lillard alone could carry the movie. The practical effects of the ghosts alone could carry the movie, but it just has a lot going for it, and it is ridiculous. I guess you could consider it like a guilty pleasure of mine, but it is peak entertainment value. It is a highly entertaining movie, and at the end of the day, that's usually what you want from a horror movie, right? So yeah, this was a bit of a different one for my remake versus original comparison series, but I really enjoyed doing it. I really can't wait to get more into some of the early 2000s remakes. I'll probably be doing one for like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I've already done one for The Ring. Maybe I'll do one for Amityville Horror or something like that. Who knows? We'll see. I also know I'm definitely gonna do one for Halloween, so stay tuned. Also give me suggestions down below. Let me know what I need to watch to make my top 10 list for the 70s, what other remake comparisons I should do, and don't forget to tell me who wore it better, Dwayne, The Rock, or me. Other than that, a big thank you to my patrons. Thank you guys for supporting me. I think once we hit 10, maybe I'll do my first private live stream for my patrons. So if you want to support me, that'll be linked down below. Because I've also been streaming weekly, usually on Saturdays at noon Pacific Standard Time. So if you enjoy live streams or you just want to ask me questions or hang out or whatever, we can do that on Saturdays. All my social media is linked down below. I have a great spooky Instagram account. That's a lot of fun. I have a travel Instagram account as well. And I've been posting some sneak peek stuff for my short film if you want to see that. So that does it. I hope that peace will be with you, and goodbye.